Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters Podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today.
Staff knew things were going wrong, but didn't feel confident to speak up about it. Or certainly at that stage, it was just they didn't speak up about it. And when we looked into it, we realised that it was around the trust in the system, and they didn't have confidence that actually they would remain in a job. That's how fearful they were, that if they spoke up against what was happening, they would be labelled as the troublemakers.
The patterns of behaviour is the culture. Patterns are the sort of unwritten, co-created agreements, sometimes written, some unwritten, but those patterns, identify those patterns. That's where you identify your culture. You won't be able to say sort of carte blanche that this is this, or without having it evidence-based to a certain extent. And I think that'll be good for the good people out there that are day in, day out doing a fantastic job.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together. Paul, Shaun, welcome to the podcast. How are we doing, fellas?
Yeah, good.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on. I came across you guys and girls and everything that you're involved with. Obviously, the mission statement of something like Say So really spoke to me as a podcaster and what you're trying to do. We said before we came on about these different layers of trust and transparency and openness, and the podcast kind of lives somewhere in between. But when I was thinking about our conversation today, I was framing it around this aspect of societal trust, which I think sounds perhaps a little bit glorified, and I'm not trying to catastrophize, but it is one of those things that's widely believed to be the fundamental component of all like prosperous societies. You know, that social trust underpins everything we do. You know, the legal systems that we both work in, and you guys have a history in the police and stuff, the democratic stuff, and it helps economical growth and just our own, more importantly for me, because obviously I don't work for a capitalist company anymore. I work for the emergency services, have done for nearly 20 years. It's that physiological and psychological more than anything else aspect of people's well-beings. Are you both familiar with the guy called Simon Sinek?
I've heard his name, yes.
Oh, you're going to have a look at him, because he gives these great analogies of bringing people within that full circle of trust. Because if you're spending so much of your cognitive power worrying about being safe at work, being trusted at work, being protected at work, then you're not very productive at work, because so much of your cognitive horsepower is being put into, oh my God, am I safe? Am I going to lose my job? I have to worry about what so-and-so said about me or saying about me. So if you could start us off with a little bit of a background of when you both sort of thought there was a need or recognized there was a need in something like Say So, and the mission statement of improving the standards and creating sort of better working environment for people, and also kind of both how you both met, because you both have a background in the police as well.
I'll go first then, Peter.
Do you notice how I always let him go first?
That's always the weird one when you've got 3 people in a conversation or something like this. Take us away, Shaun.
Okay. Yeah, well, Paul and I first met in a project when we were both working on a contract for Surrey Police. We were asked to look at quite a high number. I think it was over 100, 120, 125 of some serious, what we called then serious care failures. Okay. So allegations arising out of residential care scenarios, allegations of neglect or abuse that had reached a level that
really emotive stuff, isn't it? When you see some of those horrible videos on the news of abuse, and it's pretty horrific.
Yeah, so 125 of these were raised to a level where they were reported to police for investigation. So they were pretty serious. And we were asked to look at these going they spread back over about 5 years from, I think this is 2015 going back to 2010. So we looked at 125 of them as a team, a small team of us, basically to try and pick out any areas of improvement where the police could improve their safeguarding, where they could improve their
correlating
investigation.
trends. The low hanging fruit sounds a bit offensive.
Yeah,
Like you're
but
not
basically
looking for it.
help them.
Yeah,
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 basically help them develop their staff. Basically, to
yeah.
say, look, what's got where can we pick out anything that's gone wrong? Can we make improvements around how they deal with those sorts of cases?
And that sort of thing's petrifying for the future as well, because we do have a massive growing aged population. So a lot of us are going to find ourselves in care as we're living longer.
Absolutely, and you know that is another reason why you know we felt that Say So was so relevant, because that the you know the problems are only going to get larger,
Yeah,
not necessarily worse, but larger. You know, so yeah, we looked at those cases, and the surprising thing that we found, or certainly the surprising thing for me that was found, was in something like 65% of the cases we looked at. Um, when you move the time dial or whatever backwards before the event, staff in those care homes knew things were going wrong, knew things were happening that were perhaps against policy, against procedure, etc., but didn't feel confident to speak up about it. Or certainly at that stage, it was just they didn't speak up about it. Okay.
Yeah.
And when we looked into it, we realized that it was around, again, the trust in the system. They didn't have trust that the system, if they spoke up, that anything would be done. They didn't trust that the organisation would look after them very well, the staff that was actually reporting. And they didn't have confidence that actually they would remain in a job. That's how fearful they were, that if they spoke up against what was happening, they would be labelled as the troublemakers, and they would find themselves...
because the automatic answer is, well, no one else is saying it, Shaun.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we realised that there was a gap between when something starts to go wrong in any sector, but let's focus on the care sector for now. When things start to go wrong, and then when that critical stage when actually I hate using this word, but it gets to like a whistleblowing stage, a right last minute, you know.
Yeah.
We realised that there was a gap, that actually there was really little procedures around, well, if something starts to go wrong, where can we report that? How can we get that out safely and confidently, so that the care provider themselves, and don't forget, even bad care providers don't want things to go badly wrong, because it really affects them.
100%. Yeah.
So if we can get that information out during that period of where it's starting to go wrong, so up until the point it's really, really badly going wrong, if we can address it and get that concern out at that stage, then it's a win-win-win for everybody.
And I think what's important, Pete, on that is when you look at, you know, the large percentage of the people actually down the timeline did know what was going on. But when you speak to someone, particularly in the care setting, to be criticised about something in relation to caring for someone, that adds another dynamic, which restricts people from being you know, trusting other people, for being able to speak about it. So that dynamic is very different in the fire service. For example, we're sort of focused on the staff, but in the care sector, there's a staff and the vulnerable people that they're looking after who take the impact of the no trust. And I think that's so important. And you have to believe as well, which I think is, when I say have to believe in people and the brilliance of relationships, that most of those people are fighting against the fact that they do want to say something. But the influence of the narrative around the environment they work in, what they do looking after vulnerable people, they just can't cope with that criticism. And we always felt that we could give them an environment, build a relationship where they trusted us, because ultimately we weren't going to get the information we wanted to and let them down. You know, we knew, you know, go forward on the timeline, you'll find out you can trust us. But that message would never, you know, maybe 10 years ago with some people, it never landed. It never got through.
It's that word treatment, isn't it? It's how you're treating someone. Because I see this both, like you say, in the care world, but then if I look about the work you do in the fire and rescue service and other emergency services, when we're looking at leadership and or management versus the people that they're caring for or looking after, it's like if it were a procedural thing, They'd be like, you're not good professionally, like the procedure's wrong or this. But when it's an interpersonal behavior, I'm almost making a personal accusation, which is where the fear comes from. I'm saying, Paul, you're not being nice to me. You're not a nice, you're treating me poorly. I feel fearful. I feel bullied. I feel ostracized. It's a personal reflection again. It's not like you're not good at managing that asset. You're not good at managing this work stream. You're not treating me nicely as a human being.
And again, Pete, it's a really great point, because, if you understand behavior and you understand how people, how you appear to people, do we regularly reflect on ourselves and think, well, actually, and I use the analogy in my head, my wife says to me, why my wonderful daughters don't have boyfriends. And they say, well, because they don't want to come to the house when you're at the house. And I say, well, I don't say anything. And they say, well, you don't have to say anything. And and genuinely, I've reflected on that, because I don't want my daughters not to have, not to have partners. But sometimes you see the environment of the police service and the fire service. It's dictated already, isn't it? So that representation is always already there.
And it's that impact intended versus impact felt, isn't it? Because like with your daughters, the impact intended is protection, care. Look, but the impact felt might be whatever, claustrophobia, might be fear. I always say there's like loads of different levels of self-awareness. Like, do you both have children?
Definitely.
Yeah.
So there's like, when you're a kid, you've got a little bit of your impact on other people, and then maybe you get a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and you're a bit more self-awareness because you want this person to like you, and so you're aware of how you act and how they respond to it. And then maybe one day you get a pet. I always say that's an interesting one. Like, we've got 3 dogs, 3 horses. I want this thing to behave a certain way. I want it to do in certain things. So I need to like a horse. You can't really wrestle a horse. You can't force it to do a lot of stuff. It has to want to do the things that you want it to do. And people might say that sounds manipulative, but a lot of human behavior is manipulative, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that sometimes. But then when you have children as well, it's like another layer of self-awareness, because it's how you desperately want them to feel versus how they actually feel. And I feel like people in leadership levels, if they haven't had some, I'm not saying everyone has to have kids, but it does give, there's loads of lenses, isn't there? There's loads of sides of that cube of self-awareness, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the more you can understand that when you're building relationships, sometimes with people that don't want to talk to you, if you understand that detail, then you're going to have more progress, and you're going to get to the bottom. You're going to build more trust, and when you build more trust, there's more understanding, and people are fascinating anyway, aren't they? And if you have that understanding in the back of your mind, the fact that everybody's different. I played golf the other week, and I've been looking for someone. A project that we're doing with a charity is around making some woodwork stuff, a little woodwork room where the young people can build things, and it's therapeutic and it's good. And I played golf with a pal of mine, and he introduced a friend, and I always like it when he introduces a new friend. And I've been looking for this person in relation to the woodwork for ages. Blimey, when we're having a conversation, just getting to know each other, in retirement, his hobby that he loves is wood turning. And all of a sudden I thought, oh my God, I've got someone that could come and support the kids for the thing. So if I hadn't made the effort to go out and get to know him and understand people and have a conversation and be open with him when he had the conversation with me, to tell a little bit about myself as well, then we'd never have got to that place, would we?
And
100%. It was an exhilarating game of golf anyway, but it was great to meet someone new.
My wife's job came from a similar capacity. So one of our dogs is a German Shepherd, and I wanted to make sure we trained him properly. So I went to behavioral classes and met somebody that is an ex-army. He's got a master's in animal behavior. Anyway, one of his friends, we used to work for the Royal Guards, and he runs a company where they work with children with severe learning difficulties, autism and whatnot, and they have horses, pigs. It's like they've got loads of classroom cabins, and I forget, my terminology is terrible, but it's a shared learning environment where children do a little bit of all the subjects, maths, English, blah, blah, blah. And then they intersperse that with working with the animals, caring for the animals, especially children with things like autism or real difficulties. When they're around a big animal like a horse, it really tends to calm them. And I don't pretend to be an expert in it. But anyway, my wife ended up going to work there for them. And I've had a fantastic relationship with them. I love going to places like that. But I love what you said there in an aspect of like building rapport as well when you're first meeting people, Paul. I have like this egotistical thing about myself. They'd even know I'm a big 6'4", 18-stone male or whatever, I'm like, I really genuinely believe I can build rapport with anybody. 100%. I'm like, I always think as soon as I meet somebody, I love to think how I must come across as this big whatever. And then I almost like time it in my mind. I'm like, how quickly can I deconstruct all of those misconceptions and build rapport with this person, no matter how they look, no matter what they're like. And that's kind of the podcasting as well. It's like, no, I don't care who they are. Not saying I don't care, but I'm like, of course I can have a conversation with Paul. Of course I could have a conversation with Shaun. And I see that wonderfully done in the police as well, where they can have, non-emotive, structured, empathetic conversations with people that have carried out some horrific crimes. And people are like, oh, I could never sit down with a pedophile. I'm like, yeah, absolutely I could, because I'm interested in learning what would it take for somebody to have that blueprint of the world.
And that is that for me, Pete. That's a really frustrating thing about public service, because there's so many skills that fire service carers have, police service particularly, because we have knowledge of that I think the public don't understand.
No.
To actually have the skills, and there are training courses out there, but obviously I've always said, what makes a good detective if someone can communicate well and can get their point across and can, as you say, build rapport and build that trust with people, because you're never going to get to the truth of what's happened unless you build that rapport, and that is with witnesses, it's with victims, and also, as you say, it's with suspects as well. So it's about I think giving up a little bit about yourself as well, it's sort of saying, if you came across as the big, robust, almost automaton.
I'm perfect. I'm this.
Yeah,
I'm that,
automaton. Then I think most people will just, put up a shield or whatever, So I think, as you say, building rapport has been the center of what we've been doing, to be honest, because we realized, Pete, that to overcome that lack of trust, okay, that there was in the care sector when we first started, to overcome that, part of of what is needed is for the staff in those care homes, or any of the staff of any of the client companies that we now have, is to understand what makes us tick and understand why we're doing it, and to build that rapport and trust. Basically, that is the key. What we think is key to actually getting getting to the depths of the information that we want, and getting that information, making the staff feel that they can relay that information, and trust the process. Basically,
I think that was definitely when we sat in a little canteen in Surrey Police Station having a cup of coffee, whenever it was, back in 2016, and we looked at each other and we said, should we do this? Should we do this? One thing we genuinely knew, and we didn't really know each other that well, is that we knew that we could build rapport with people to make them feel confident and make them trust us to bring that. And that was the foundation of everything we did. And I, from my own personal point of view, I know that, I had to learn on the hoof as well, because I felt I understood a lot. The biggest compliment for me in the world I worked in was, that bloke talks a lot, but he's not actually told you anything.
Yes.
So being able to, and that was planned, but being able to then tell a little bit about yourself, why you're doing what you're doing, and Shaun talking, and I think we've sort of been on that journey together. I've moved forward a bit, Shaun's caught up, then Shaun's moved forward, and we've both sort of allowed ourselves to be a little bit vulnerable around some of the reasons. And
podcasting is exactly that as well. I always say to people, you need to learn the pitter-patter. That's all it is. Learn the connectives. So you're almost like turning something around, spinning it round as you're continuing to talk, as they look for inroads, and you take feedback from them visually and verbally of where they want to go with the conversation. And you've been talking for 40 seconds, but you haven't really said anything. And that's a bit of a trick. But you also, like, you made a great point as well there around showing your vulnerabilities. I always say to people, like, if you just appear, and you gave a great analogy of a shield as well, was if you just appear like this silver glistening shield, and I think that's the detriment of being overly professional at times in some of our services, is that when I do speak about me and my wife and separating for a period of time, or our miscarriages, or my drug addictions, or all the surgeries I've had in my body and my setbacks and 21 failed promotion processes to get to the role that I'm in now, those act as like little anchor points, little hooks. little crevices for someone to go, oh yes, I connect with that one. You are similar to me. It helps with that mirroring aspect of it, doesn't it?
Mm. Yeah, no, indeed, and so getting back to the trust issue you spoke about at the first place, we believe that is central and core to what we're trying to achieve now. So taking the story further, Pete, once we found that there was this gap in terms of people not being able to speak up, as Paul said, over a cup of coffee in a canteen at Guildford Police Station, I think it was. We said, look, we want to do something about this. Okay. And in that early day, well, I think we both said to each other, we don't know where this journey is going to lead. No. But we knew we had some skills. We knew we had some experience. We knew that we could look after and keep information secure. We knew and was confident of our own abilities to an extent, if you like.
That's an important box to tick. Sorry, Shaun, isn't it? Yeah. The levels of the organizations that you're working with now, you couldn't just be some cowboy from the personal development sector, because you are dealing with some very, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, I didn't want to skip past it, because you are dealing with some very sensitive information.
Yeah, indeed. But, I've got experience, so as Paul, of dealing with sensitive information, making sure that all the protocols are adhered to. We then set about, actually, once we decided to go forward with Say So, designing a website, making sure the information could be held centrally and in a secure way. And one of the things that we started to do was sort of consult with care staff. We went to a number of care shows, primarily because when we set up Say So, we are and we still are marketing. We are aiming into the care sector. That's where we were going, because we felt very much we've been safeguarding for many years. We feel very much aligned with vulnerable people and how we can perhaps protect them more. And what we wanted to do was market into the care sector and go to those care providers who would understand that, actually, do you know what? By listening to my staff, I'm going to get more information around risk out than I would if I didn't listen to my staff very well, And
these are my words, not yours, but it's like I see the care sector as some massive, enormous companies. And in my personal opinion, I've had a couple of girlfriends in the past who were care workers. Sometimes, my words, not yours, there is a very, very, very low level of training to get some people into these. And it's kind of a just get out there and tick the boxes with some of these companies, and they have a very high turnover. They don't look after their staff very well because, as we alluded to earlier, it's such a colossally enormous growing market. It's hard to get into because you have to get all the right legislation in place. So when some companies are in there, they're just trying to get the job done, and the level of how it is being done and the care for their staff historically has in places been pretty unbelievably horrific, in my personal opinion.
And it's very difficult as well for us. It was a challenge because we're not health professionals, and there's you are treated with sort of some skepticism. You've got to be very careful not to criticize the way they care. You've got to allow them to know that you care, and again, building a relationship to get accepted. But going on from that, that sort of vulnerability of the people that they're looking after, so many of those people don't have a voice, and this is a big part of Say So, is everybody having a voice. And how many times have you seen people interact with old people and even professionals, care workers, and they're talking at them, but they're never actually listening, stimulating a bit of conversation. Yeah. They've got a lot to say. Some of these elderly people, and some of my greatest heroes were old people. They might not have been very articulate. They might have had a little bit of dementia, but they've still got a conversation. They've still got a voice. And that's
really offensive. It's not even just the elderly. I know people in their mid-20s, mid-30s who have become wheelchair bound due to an injury. And they said the change in the way they are treated, not just as in I can't get up and down a set of stairs, the way that people interact with them as a human being has been a notable shift. There is an assumed lack of cognitive ability, like they have some severe learning difficulty because they're in a wheelchair. And it's pretty shocking.
Yeah. And again, it's getting a bit deep into the sort of behavioural science type bit. But when you show these things and you present these things genuinely, which Shaun does and I do just by coincidence, having been brought up in two different sort of lives in the police service, and I think that's why we get on so well. when you present those characteristics, people do react to it, and that's where the sort of genuine sort of trust can be built. And and we say in some of our inductions, this is us. We have a media profile a little bit. Scope us out. Trust. Try and you know. You have to trust us to work with the system appropriately, and and it's important. It's a privilege to be trusted, isn't it? Really.
So we felt that there was a gap, if you like. There was a need, and after some consultation, we started to market. We've got, I think, 30 to 40 care homes now that we look after. So quite a few care homes that we're looking after for about 4 care providers. We've got more care providers that's coming on board. I'm going to meet someone next week around getting on board. But what we find, Pete, is and this is anecdotal, okay, but our experience is actually when you talk to ladies in a senior position in care companies or indeed other organisations, when you talk about actually we don't think staff's voices are being heard, perhaps some people are being marginalised, minimised, or whatever. A lot of the ladies we talk to get it straight away.
100%.
You talk to, and there are some men get it as well. I'm not trying to say this is a real generalisation, but this is our experience, or certainly my experience. And so I do think there is a case for saying that ladies in business have been in the past marginalised, and they have experienced it. There are really good care providers out there, really senior care leaders that we've spoken to, and when we talk to them about what we do, and they go, "Love it." That fits our people program. It fits what we want to do. Love it. Okay. But for those that perhaps need a little bit of convincing, when we talk about finance, Pete, at the end of the day, we say, look, on average, the reports that come in through Say So can save sort of up to £20,000 from the worst case scenario developing.
Oh, yeah.
Suddenly the old ching ching comes in and it's
you
cast
your mind forward to that person going off on stress and then all of the litigation and all of the mediation.
It shouldn't be motivated by money though, should it? That's the thing.
It shouldn't be, but they are
reality.
part of the public sector and they legally held to a budget. They can't just, I'm sure they would love to have a mental health professional on every single station, on every single team, but you have to acknowledge it, you're right.
But don't forget, pretty much every care provider is a business at the end of the day, and so it does. So I think from every angle, I'm just looking at the CQC inspection elements, and they are similar to the HMIC inspection to a certain degree, but they've got one for well led. Is your business well led? Do you provide safe care?
Yeah.
Do you respond to the needs of your end users? And Say So can help with so much of that in terms of if they can get more information out from their staff that otherwise they wouldn't have, then clearly they're going to run their business better at the end of the day. So for all those reasons, we started Say So, marketed into the care sector, and the history is that we moved into the additionally moved into the fire sector, but that transition of moving into the fire sector has taught us that actually Say So and the principles of Say So are
applicable across many
applicable sectors. Across every business sector. Where you've got staff, particularly at remote sites or maybe more than 20 staff, there's no way that one person who runs that business can understand what's going on every day, 24 hours a day in their business.
Because when the organizations get that big, the cultural ties get a little bit weaker as well, don't it? And the values and the core ethics and all that sort of jazz, every time it gets filtered and reinterpreted and it goes down across layers, across departments, outstretched, sometimes globally, it's like Chinese whispers. It comes out the other end and you go, that's nothing like what I heard so-and-so say 6 months ago when we were stood in the main meeting.
Yeah.
When we overlay that onto the fire and rescue service and the police service, from your backgrounds working with both, I mean, obviously, we all probably saw the monster coming over the hill 4 or 5 years ago with a lot of these cultural reviews and shining a big, much needed, but embarrassing light into the corners of certain cultures and certain sectors. What were your finger on the pulse indications? Because this will have been a couple of years after you've probably first started the business. Maybe we're talking 2018, 2019. What did you see from that versus your time in the police versus what you were seeing and hearing in the sectors like the fire and rescue service?
Well, that's an interesting point actually, because we started in the fire sector in 2018. Well, Paul can tell the story, but we basically met a guy who was then the chief fire officer of one of the fire services.
Who was the first one you started with, Paul?
It was Royal Berkshire.
Okay.
A chap called Trevor Ferguson was the chief there. And we met at a firefighters charity where I was there representing my children's charity, and we were supporting the firefighters, as we coincidentally have done for a long time, and we had a conversation around it. And he and we often talk about this in the presentations because I think it's a great story. I was really impressed at the man that was Trevor Ferguson. A very honest, open man, and it came across that he was determined to look after his staff. It was a priority. You can talk about it, tick a box, but my judgment was, this man really cares about his staff. He understands the role, and he's a great leader. And when he found out about Say So in the conversations, we made it very clear we were starting in the fire service, in the care sector. And he said, this fits for what I want in relation to the well-being piece. Would you consider sort of adapting it a little bit for the fire service? And we said, of course we would. It was ahead of the plan for us. But, primarily one of the main reasons was because he wanted to hear from his staff and he wanted to look after the well-being piece. So that's really how it got going. Back in, when was that, Shaun? 2017?
2018, wasn't it? When we first got that early, yeah. I think September, January 2018. But I think, Paul, we should put a big shout out to Nikki Richards, actually, because she was I think head of HR. I think she's chief executive now at Royal Berkshire. But she held us under a microscope for the first session, lots of questions, etc. But has absolutely embraced us and has recommended us elsewhere. So,
I'm going to say, so for that individual there as one example, but when you are speaking to HR departments or people in organization, or some of them, because the only idea of the naming of human resources can be a little bit cold to people, even though that is effectively what we are. But how was your relationship talking to some of them? Because some might take it that, oh, Paul, Shaun, Say So, you're trying to tell us how to do our job. This is an accusation that we're not even, you're saying, that's my job. Everything you're saying you're going to do, I already do. Are you saying I'm not doing it very well?
Yeah. Frosty to say the least, Pete. And I think, and that comes back down to the sort of persistence and the determination and the belief that we had. We've got to keep having these conversations, and slowly we've got into the room with HR, and they understand more. And Nikki was the same in the early days. I think there was a certain amount of skepticism. It was new. Yep. This information potentially is going to be sensitive information about individuals. Is going to be sitting with an independent organisation that we've only, we don't know that well, that we've just done some due diligence on. So we get that, but that's those have been some big conversations with HR. But fortunately now, they're very much more receptive, because that whole element of independence has been accepted, hasn't it? It's not long at all, but the conversations with HR before, independence, it's not on. We're not going.
Yeah, it takes a massive amount of confidence from services that you are working with to really open up their doors and say, we're happy if you speak to anybody. Make your number, make your contact details, make your extensions available to all of our staff. It's not like when you have someone from HMI coming to visit and they go, oh, where's so-and-so that was off on the sick for 6 months? Stick him in the closet. Send him off to another station. Hide that woman, that man, that whatever in a place where we can put our hand over their mouths, really, for want of a better description, which is very sad.
Do we think that still goes on a lot?
I don't see very much of it myself, but I live within my own biased bubble, which is the problem. People, I'm not remotely popular or anything like that, but I mean, people obviously know what the podcast is. If they know me, they know the podcast. So negative, toxic people don't tend to adopt a position in my environment. They know I don't tolerate it. They know I'm very happy to challenge things. But that's also a little bit sad because that means that perhaps I don't see some of these things. But I have in the earlier side of my career, I'm talking 10, 12 years ago, was part of 5 or 6, probably only 3 that went anywhere serious. And I don't really go in any cliques. I'm not part of any WhatsApp groups, which I always say to people, it has benefits and co-host it, because it's like, I'm not in on the latest news. But what people do begin to identify, and this is again what I love about the podcast, we get a lot of really fantastic guests, yourself included, people that are really moving and shifting and operating, and they come and talk to you, they come and talk to me, and other people will do the same because they know you can be trusted. But that comes at a cost. It means you don't get involved in all the clicks, you don't get involved in all the gossip, but the cost of not being able to be trusted, I much prefer the position that I'm in now. So that's a very long-winded answer to saying that I don't tend to hear as many cases of it now. But if someone was doing something bad, they probably wouldn't tell me because they know I'd probably do something about it.
Yeah. I mean, I think what we have found is there is a mixture of ingredients in that make up the culture in any particular workplace. I mean, there's the general workplace culture of the whole organization, but then you have pockets of perhaps less positive
definitely
culture, if you like, where people are reluctant and find it difficult to speak up. And I've got to sort of accentuate here that, you know, say so is not here just as the standard. Oh, I want to report something, so I'm going to say so. What we're here for is those times when people feel they can't report through their line management. You know, if people can report something through their line management or in any existing systems, Pete, we want them to do that.
Mm-hmm.
We want the organisation to flourish and be the best it can be in its own way, if that's possible. But we also understand that no matter how good and how positive a culture is, sometimes things will change. Relationship will change in the workplace. Different policies come in, different managers perhaps. Maybe someone will fall out with someone. Maybe there's some conflict that actually makes it just embarrassing, awkward, difficult to raise a particular point in the workplace. And we're here for those times. We're not here for, I'm gonna speak to say so about this sort of thing. You know, it's about, if you can speak to your line manager, please do so. But come to us when
I think organisations like the police, but definitely the fire service, there's a bit of a two-sided coin again when we talk about the strength of the culture. Because I do think the fire and rescue service has a very, very strong culture, but that's neither. It's both a positive and a negative. Because strong isn't saying good or bad; it's just saying strong culture. Because some stations operate as mini empires. You know, certainly with on-call, volunteer, retained sectors. This person's worked there for 20 years. Their dad worked there for 20 years. The fire and rescue service, for better or worse, still reeks at times of nepotism and, my dad's brother and my sister. It's a dynasty, brother. You know, everybody knows everybody. If I did want to report it to the senior leadership or the next person above, the station manager, the group manager, who is the group manager? Oh, it's John. Oh, you mean John that you were on Red Watch with for 15 years?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I'm probably not going to talk to John then.
Who you fell out once over something minor, and he's remembered that ever since, sort of thing.
Yeah.
You know, that I think that happens in every workplace, and it's those types of concerns. But having said that, and I've got to reiterate this, you know, for because we've been working in the fire service since 2018, the fire sector, and generally speaking, the leaders that we have encountered who have taken on say so have embraced trying to listen to their staff, and I think are trying to change things for the better to ever improve. However, I think there is a problem is there's, as you were saying earlier, there's this perception, at the very least, the perception that there is other forces at work, if you like, or a negative aspect of reporting things.
It's a gamble.
Fear
that's what it feels like.
A fear that something might happen, whereas actually that may just be a perception because they've heard of bad cases in the past, or they've read something, seen something on Facebook or social media or whatever. Oh, that could happen to me.
Or even if it was dealt with professionally and someone didn't get the outcome that they wanted, they then reel back and go, "Oh, it's because Shaun and Paul are best mates, and I never stood a chance." And and you go, "Well, actually,
Yeah.
maybe your claim was just false, and it was
Yeah, I mean, don't,
basically."
you know, there is clearly an element of that, in as much as they are very genuine reasons why things are done in many cases.
Yeah.
All I'm trying to say is that there is the fear of consequences of reporting that I think is very real, and in certainly when we started in the care sector, I think the fragility of the employment there is much worse than in the fire sector, for instance. You know, mind you, COVID has changed things since that. I think, you know, the care sector is now desperate for staff.
Yeah.
Whereas there was a point that, you know, if someone spoke up and it was against them, that they may well get sacked and fired or whatever. You know, I think that the care sector is now much more keen to keep hold of their staff, but there's that risk that's always been there. In the fire sector, it's not as acute as that, but there is that fear.
No, but we are struggling with recruitment. We're doing massive amount of recruitment UK wide, which comes with many of its own challenges. We need to be appealing as an employer. We want to be seen as a place that's safe. We want to be. I always say the fire and rescue service and emergency services in general should be like a moral compass for society. People should see you as a good thing. They should see you as having good morals and good values. You're safe. You can protect people. You're there to help. But obviously pay as a driver, you know, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but that's one limiting aspect to some people wanting to be part of it. But even if jobs got paid very, very well, if you didn't feel safe and protected, you didn't feel like it was a place that you could, you know, have a fulfilling career and feel like you could make friends and enjoy yourself going to work every day, then I don't think it matters what you're going to get paid. You know, I could get paid a lot more for probably being a hired hitman, but it goes against my moral values to do that kind of job. So, and it probably wouldn't be a very good team either. You know, you might genuinely get stabbed.
Can I go back to just finishing off what I was trying to say? And I'm very long-winded, and I do apologize.
No, please, Shaun. Sorry.
But in 2018, we started with Berkshire. We then went on to Hampshire, Staffordshire, West Yorkshire, up until that point in last year. And I think you asked, did we see this coming? You know,
yes.
You know, and yes, we did have some reports that from those fire services that you would look at and say, "Oh, that's a bit worrying. That's a bit concerning." A little bit of misconduct started to arise, that sort of thing. But then I think what's happened is with the HMIC, FRS, and the NFCC now recommending to fire services that you should have an anonymous confidential reporting line, it's really endorsed what we were doing. And really, you know, the fire services that took us on before this last sort of input, certainly last year, deserve a pat on the back for actually seeing this before the others. So that's Berkshire, Staffordshire, Hampshire, and West Yorkshire. They saw this sort of, if you like, coming before it actually arose. So
we had the head of Staffordshire on. Is it Rob, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right, Rob.
Great fella, love Rob.
Yeah. And I think some of the sort of difficulties around, you know, what's happening and what we feel we're impacting is the sort of cultural piece, and you know, and we all use that terminology, you know, culture, but do we really understand what culture means and the likes? But you know, I think why I'm very confident we're going to go on to bigger and better and better and better things, and it's going to evolve, is because some of the positiveness, the positive change that's happening, you can't really measure, but you know, and it will take a bit of time. But you know, for example, you know, sometimes initially people think we want to see some change that we can measure within 6 months of having a reporting system that's independent. It just doesn't work like that. No. But what it will start to impact is recruitment, because people will learn that organization is that much more open, that much more transparent. They have a system where they, you know, if on that one occasion that you can't speak internally, they've given you the opportunity, another opportunity to speak to an independent platform. So that information gets to the top of the organization. When we, I'm talking from a potential member of staff, hypothetically, you know, when we heard our inductions, they said we get feedback on, you know, on every concern that we report, you know, wow. And so that sort of starts to build a different, you know, working environment. And the measuring of the culture piece is so difficult. I like to talk about patterns of behavior. The patterns of behavior is the culture. Patterns are the sort of unwritten, sort of co-created agreements, sometimes written, some unwritten, but those patterns, identify those patterns. That's where you identify your culture, and whether it's misogynistic or whether it's there's a bullying tactic. So being able to understand that and measure that, and hopefully what we're going to bring to the party fairly soon with some development of our data and our information is really going to drill down on that, so people will get a clear picture of what the patterns are, and they'll be able to say, you won't be able to say sort of carte blanche that this is this or this is that without having it evidence based to a certain extent. And I think that'll be good for the good people out there that are day in, day out doing a fantastic job.
Because they'll get the acknowledgement of
service,
those patterns that is part of what they do.
Yeah, whether it be the police service, and those people at the moment, it's like they're like those people that have those bad behavioral patterns. It's like a boil's growing on them. They're standing up. They're starting to be seen. They're starting to they're starting to be influenced because we stand in front of groups of people, and we know who the strong characters are. We know who the difficult ones are. You can sense that. That's what we've done for years. And to see those people go through a process of, I was a bit over the top, I suppose, on that. I shouldn't really have spoken to that. That's a learning, isn't it? That's a learning.
I always think
process.
of it like the tide is going out, and you realise which ones are standing there naked that said they weren't. And it's like you realise who's been doing it.
Fascinating piece. It's a fascinating piece of the business that we do. And I know Shaun says that he can talk, but we can all talk a little bit. But to actually, and again, that's the difference in Say So. Not to decry any of the tech reporting platforms, because they're brilliant. Some of our competitors, they don't really understand why we support them and encourage them, because we want more people out in the sector to have systems where they can speak up. But to go into organisations and build relationships and talk to people is very different from putting a bit of information on an app to go through a process.
People like people. You know what I mean? The key complaint, you ring a bank, you ring whatever. The thing people always say is, I want to speak to a person.
Yeah. We've some of the firefighters that we've got to know over the years have, bumped into them in the high street and things like that. You say hello. My local firefighters that past the end of my road going from one place to the other, which is a morning shift. Yeah. I think they think, who's that mad bloke in the black car that every time we pass him sticks his thumb up and goes, yeah, like that. They probably haven't related that it's the bloke that's from Say So. But when I say to my kids, that's the old firefighters from the local place. We're looking after them. And it's all a bit of a story of the value of what
that's got to be surreal,
do in the community.
Nice.
Yeah. So that's our story. And what we've what we've come to realize is that poster that used to be up, and you see it many times in you walk into any sort of corporate building. If you've got a problem, ring the head of HR on this mobile number, or email HR. That we think is flawed, pretty much fatally flawed. Because obviously, if it's a phone number, you've got to know that you've got to turn your calling line identifier off to make sure your number's not released. But even so, in many cases, HR might even recognize your voice, or once you start explaining what the issue is,
everyone knows.
Understand what team you're on, whatever, and then they can drill down and start saying, I think that's Fred Bloggs or whatever, and we've even, seen and heard stories of how, information is left on desks and stuff that should never be left on desks, and so we really are tuned to keeping information secure and confidential, etc.
Mate, it's the one part that needs to operate silo from the rest of the organization.
Yeah.
When we used to get that security of information wrong in some of the previous life we worked in, lives could be lost. Seriously, if we got it wrong, or we disclosed, if you work in the source handling world, you get it wrong, someone could lose their life. So, and that's always been the standard that we've that transferable skill from what we used to do across that. And I think, again, people pick that up, they get that it's important to us. It's a priority. If they thought that information wasn't handled we didn't handle it at the top of our game, then they wouldn't trust the system, would they? And consequently, they wouldn't trust us. So that's That is so important to as a facet to build that confidence in the system and the platform and to get people talking about what's going on.
For organizations that are still searching for solutions, the pessimists, because obviously you've alluded to the trailblazers, the people that have been brave and confident and are willing to step a little bit into the unknown. Maybe something could work, maybe it didn't work, but have starting to reap the rewards of engaging with organizations such as yourself without wanting to catastrophize. What is the cost of getting this wrong? What is the cost of those organizations? Because people, when I say it in the emergency services and more incidents, it's like indecision is a decision in itself. If you're deciding not to act now, that is a decision. Something is still happening. The incident is still getting worse. It's still escalating. Something is still happening. So for those organizations that are yet to decide on a solution, what do you know and see and hear and think is the cost of getting this wrong or failing to act?
Relationship, the relationship between senior management and the operational staff clearly is impacted or would be impacted, to a very negative extent, because wherever you go, any organisation, the stories we hear is, it's them and us. It's the senior management team, or the management, if you like, as one entity, don't understand what goes on at our level. So it's that relationship, I think, would always be at a negative, unless you can put in something like Say So that can break through that barrier and actually get the information out and build that trust, so that the information gets to that top level. And that's one of the things that we felt was a priority in what we do. We want all of the say-sos that we receive to get to that senior leadership team. Okay. We have single points of contact in each of our client organizations. And when we receive a report, we sanitize it to make sure that people can't be identified, because don't forget, they could still identify themselves, even if they're anonymous. But Paul
You're not
and
just copying and pasting and sending it off.
No, Paul and I look through that and with others to make sure it's quality assured, and sanitized to the extent that nobody could really deduce who they are.
Yeah.
We then make that report securely available to our SPOC. So that's one of the things that we really pride ourselves in as much as, look, anything you tell us will go right to the top of the organization. Okay. And that in itself is, I think, a selling point for why you should trust us as an individual, because we know and we have found that the attitudes at the top of an organization and the thinking and the strategic awareness at the top of an organization is usually different from the local managers. The people at the top of an organization will know, for instance, there's legislation about to change, or there's a budget that's about to change, or there's new guidance that's coming in, or they're changing the strategy of their organization in some way that might impact upon the decision that's being reflected upon.
I think, and for me, in sort of specific answer to your question, Pete, around what is the risk of not embracing this sort of openness, is ultimately you're going to leave yourself open to the whistleblowing situation where, for us, whistleblowing is crisis. Whistleblowing is where it's all gone wrong. So it could be everybody leaving the job, no resilience around recruitment. It could be a major scandal in relation to a situation. It could be so you are leaving yourself open to that whistleblowing. We don't use that terminology of whistleblowing because, again, it's crisis for us. If it gets to a whistleblowing stage, there's no early intervention. There's no understanding,
no preventative action.
Before it develops. And we say with Say So, what that enables, what our system enables, is to avoid the whistleblowing situation, the crisis, to get in early, to have the conversations. And potentially you could be saving staff from that. You could be saving the risk to individuals, young people, children, staff, people outside the organization. Gets to a whistleblowing situation, that it's all gone wrong, hasn't it? There's corporate risk, but that is fundamentally what Say So does. Avoids an organisation having to have a crisis situation, which is whistleblowing. And the individuals are identified; they're at risk themselves. There's no support or protection for them around the legislation, or there's not enough. So that's really what it stops. That's what they're at risk of, having a whistleblowing crisis in their organisation for the many facets of different things that could go on in the workplace. Particularly, I heard you right at the beginning of the podcast mention to your trucks. We've had lots and lots of calls over the years around the trucks. Huge value. People, 6-7 people on board them. If they go wrong, if they're not kept to there's a massive risk around those sort of things. So the thought of one of those having an accident or crashing or being driven is huge, isn't it? So that would be a real crisis.
I want to be very respectful of your time, but I also would be remiss if I didn't place myself in the mind of someone that is struggling in their workplace. So if you could walk me through the process of if I wanted to reach out as an individual myself, let's use the two comparisons of, let's say I'm not part of an organization that you are working with, and the other to be that I am. So if I'm calling in from my organization, which engages with your service, how would that conversation look? What would I need to tell you? How much detail would I need to go into? Because I'm obviously, if I'm starting to make this phone call, it might have taken a lot for me to do it. I'm probably nervous. I'm probably worried about what's actually going to happen. If one of you could talk me through how that conversation might go.
Yeah, certainly. And this is something that we explain, obviously, when we go and visit, because we believe that one of our USPs that we don't believe any other similar service does is we go out and talk to the staff, a sort of outreach work, 20 minutes, half an hour, talking to care staff or fire watches at their locations, and we talk them through the options that they have to report. Firstly, we say this is only for those times where you feel it's difficult or impossible to report through your line management. Come to us. But they've got two options. They can either go online, and go to our homepage, press a button that says "Make a Concern." They've got some. Once that page opens up, there's a warning at the top there, Peter, that says, "Look, we're not an emergency service. Okay, if someone is at immediate risk of significant harm, don't call us." And that goes back to what I was saying about, look, please call us early. If to allow your organisation an opportunity to put things right. You've been trained, you're experienced, if things are going wrong and shouldn't be happening, or whatever the concern is, don't let it get to a critical stage. Call us early. So that's how we try and cover that point. But then there's a box that opens up, and they can type as much as they like in there about how to describe the issue. It can expand as much as they like. There's some prompting questions. So we try to get as much information as possible, because at this stage, don't forget, we haven't asked what about their identity, because the information about the risk or the concern or the issue is the most important thing. So we're trying to get as much information about that. So there's some prompting questions about the location, when it's happened, who was present, those sorts of things. But we also ask on a proactive level, when might it happen again? Is there a pattern to it? What are the ingredients, for instance? What are the circumstances that are likely to...
And when you're asking who's present, are you looking for names? Are you just looking for roles, or just does it matter what I put in there, or
whatever information
Can I leave things blank if I don't want to put something in there?
Yeah, of course. Names would be ideal, because that then provides the opportunity to investigate and ask people, etc. But we do respect the fact that, hey, this person who's reporting might be in some difficulty and in fear even. So we ask these questions, and we ask, obviously, to give us as much detail as possible. They are it's totally voluntary, what they put. But the last bit that around that I was just trying to explain was that we're trying to look to the future. When might it happen again? What is there a pattern to it? What has to be present for this sort of thing to happen? Because in that way, when we pass that report to our client organizations, they've got as much information as possible, to investigate, and B, maybe prevent things happening in the future or gathering evidence in the future around what's happening. And of course, we then move on to identity after that, and they've got three choices. They can be totally anonymous, Pete, and there's no pressure from us. Right from the start, we understood why people fear so much that they want to be anonymous. We understand that, and we respect that, and we don't put anybody under any pressure. We'd rather have that information if it's concerning risks to the organisation. We'd rather have that information anonymously than not have it at all. At the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we take that. Then another option is to be confidential to say so. In other words, they can provide their name and contact details to us, but we pledge that we won't pass that on to anybody else unless they give us written permission.
Okay.
But it enables us to get back to them, Pete, if we need to get some more information or etc. Okay. Or they can be fully open.
Plus, you can connect the dots, like you say, if they put multiple things in. Yeah, I never thought about that, actually. You've been able to go back to the individuals.
That's the feedback piece, isn't it? Which is, even when you say to someone, even someone that's anonymous, we can continue a dialogue.
Yeah.
And in reality, what happens is quite often that anonymous person is comfortable with the conversation, comfortable with the dialogue, and they become confidential. So they sort of step down, and it adds whether we like it or not, it adds an apparent credibility, because we can say to the organisation that we know who this individual is now. They were anonymous, but they now feel comfortable. As they've replied to the
that's
request.
A real testament, yeah.
And that's built that rapport, and that's where we, because sometimes the organisation will say, well, look, we need a little bit more information. We can't really. Can you go back to them? So a platform facilitates that dialogue to reopen again. And because we've always told the individual, whether anonymous, confidential, or open, come back to the platform, put your unique reference in, and you'll see the feedback. And although we don't pressurize the organisation, the organisation know we're looking for feedback all the time. Sometimes the feedback is not what they want to hear, but at least it's feedback. Those two guarantees, feedback and getting it to the top of the organisation, is a win-win for us, because it's a good start, isn't it? It's a good start to building that rapport around what's actually happened. But I think you've also got to be aware, our operators on the phone and ourselves, sometimes, when you mention, you touched on it yourself there, it's taken a big step to make this call. It could be a personal thing. As say so, we've got to be aware of the indicators of someone's emotional sort of state and well-being, because we can signpost them. We will be looking to them to say to them, we'll maybe put the concern to side, but you really need to speak to your organisation. You've got some great support, and deal with yourself and at the start. So that's really important to be aware of that. Fortunately, touch wood, over the years, I don't think many people have sort of come online or report to us where we've been really concerned about them as an individual. But obviously that is in the back of our minds as well, because that courageous bit to speak up sometimes, if it's something maybe that's happened at home that's reflecting work, that's a tough conversation, isn't it? So we have to be very aware of the individual who's talking to us, whether it be via the phone or via the written word.
Absolutely.
So just finishing off the conversation that I was saying, so they've got three options around their identity: anonymous, confidential, or fully open, which means that they give their name and details. They don't mind who we pass it on to, but they've come through that independent route, because what we've found, Pete, is, and I think you read it in any of the research and any of the recommendations of any of the reports you see about scandals, crises, or whatever, always the recommendation afterwards, you must have an independent reporting process, because that's where people who want to report things naturally migrate to. They naturally want to find something that is independent from their employer. Okay. Yeah. So that's the some people just want to come through that route. But as Paul says, everybody gets a reference number. Everybody, and we're moving to a position later this year where everybody will get a username and a passphrase. Okay, there's something new, so that they can log back in, even if they're anonymous. Okay, you keep their username and passphrase, and they can get their feedback. At the moment, we give them a reference, and they can use that to get their, either telephone us and verbally explain what their reference number is, and we can confirm who they are in that respect, and then give them some feedback. Or they can go online to our homepage, and there's a place on there where you can input the reference number and get your feedback. So we think it's very important that people can, under any circumstances, whether they're confidential, anonymous, or fully open, they get that feedback. They get a result or an update around what's happening about the issue that they've raised.
What are the percentages between people that choose to speak verbally versus submit something electronically? I know I'm putting you on the spot there. Is there if you had a finger in the air, is it 50-50? Do people prefer to speak to people, or do they prefer to write it down?
I think it's more, I have to say, possibly because of our digital age that we now live in, it's probably 60-40 in terms of using our online reporting. But, I think, because we have got people available on a free phone 0800 number, safeguarding trained people that are used to, dealing with people in vulnerable situations, that there's always that option there as a sort of, I wouldn't say comfort blanket, but some people just like to talk to someone.
Yeah. Some people struggle to find the words themselves, and sometimes
and they just want that little bit of support.
I want to be very respectful of your time, gents, but I'd be remiss if I didn't give people a place to go. They've heard a lot about what you do, how you bring value to the services, how you create that safe environment for cultures and attitudes to change, or at least be heard. What is the best way for organizations that are still struggling to find a solution? We'll put obviously the link to the website in the notes for this episode, but how would you prefer people reach out if they wanted to learn a little bit more about it?
Yeah, we've got a contact page on our website. That's how most organisations come into us. Hello, we've heard about Say So. Could you someone contact us, so they can come in that way? They can dial the 0800 321 3546 phone number and press option number 2. That comes through to our, if you like, our office.
Mm-hmm.
Those two ways.
And I think, Peter, we're very pleased to be able to say that I think once people have a conversation with us, or we have a very brief presentation that we give, it's quite a success rate. Once they have a conversation, probably takes about 25 minutes, and they see a brief presentation of where we're at, and it stimulates the questions. There's a very large percentage of those people come back to us, or those organisations come back to us, and we're working together. And that's the important part. It's a topic that is so complex. It's so fascinating. It's so detailed. And I would say, just do yourself that there will be no harm, nothing lost. Do yourself that, give yourself the opportunity to maybe have that, get to that stage where you have a little presentation or an interaction with either Shaun or myself or one of the team, and look at that presentation and then take it away and digest it. And I think, that will be, you'll see all the answers yourself and have the answers to the questions.
It was a very easy sell for me. I forget which one of you I had the first conversation with, but, I saw it come through a communication form. I went to the website and it just made sense. I was like, oh, yeah, obvious. I want to have a conversation with these gentlemen. It makes sense.
Oh, thank you. But what we've noticed, actually, Pete, is when we first started, to actually have somebody come in, a CEO of a care company or a senior leader in any company, have a couple of blokes come and visit them in the boardroom, whatever, and say, look, we want to go out and talk to your staff and get, you could see it was a little bit of a difficult sell. Oh, are we going to get a load of grief out of this? You say, well, you have to take the rough with the smooth. You might get some stuff that you think, actually, oh God, not another one of these or whatever, but you will understand more about what's going on in your organization, and your staff will see that, appreciate what you're trying to do. And then when you plug in the bit about actually you're going to save money and your reputation will build and you'll have, better standards, and your safety will improve, your compliance will improve, suddenly that door is opening much easier. Yeah. And we've certainly seen now, obviously, let's not mention that horrible beast of a person in the Met Police. But since the misconduct in public roles has emerged as a very, very topical media thing, lots of public services, and not just public services, they're all reflecting on their people strategies, on their
Get your house in order.
on their vetting, on all sorts of stuff around compliance, misconduct, standards, and all that sort of thing. Which I think, and I'm not. This is my opinion, but this has gone back to austerity days, and before austerity started, there was this slippage. I think everybody now is tightening up everything and really understanding that fundamentally their people strategy must include engagement with their staff, the best possible engagement with their staff.
That morale piece, one of the really exciting changes that you see. We have been into some organizations in the fire sector where there's been a little bit of pushback, around they don't want to listen. They don't want to listen to us. And literally within 40 minutes, you can have the sort of conversation around, well, why would they put us in place? We're independent. They can't influence us. Yes, there's a remuneration for what we do, but we're not going to be turning up to your organisations in Bentleys and the likes. There's a but
I drive a Nissan Micra. It's really lovely, actually.
They put us in place because they want to hear from you, and you can see that. And literally, that is a real change that you can see sometimes. And some of the conversations might be as you leave. Well, let's see what happens. And it goes on to the positive stuff, because to land that message with the staff that your organisation's leaders, they want to hear from you. And this is what we're doing, in addition to all the good practice we've got on the reporting systems and direct reporting to your line managers. On that one occasion, you can go through this independent organisation, because that's how much we want to hear from you. And you can see that they can't really deny that. And it's only time will then tell, won't it? That's the
when I speak to new recruits and I mention your company, there is that eyebrow raising moment where we say, we have this organization completely independent to us, and it's a reporting mechanism. If you feel that culture of trust isn't there, if you have something you desperately want to speak about, even in those early stages, it's completely independent. We don't get any details, and that eyebrow raises. It's like, what? These people, you can tell them anything, and like, you're definitely not going to know who I am, because we always say, oh look, just come to me, if you're anything, day or night, you've got a phone number, it's all right, give us a ring. And they're like, yeah, but you're the problem. Not for me, hopefully, but.
And that's what I say about it takes time. But that message, Pete, that you're giving there, that is reverberating around your organisation.
Yeah, 100%.
That's becoming its own pattern of behaviour. But it's a positive pattern of behaviour. It's a positive culture that's changing. What? You really can talk to someone anonymously. Yeah. And no one will know. Wow.
It's sad how surreal that is for people, that it's the fact that it does raise eyebrows.
And what, actually, I'm really pleased to say that we Berkshire gave us our first foothold in the fire sector, which we're really pleased with, and we've got a great relationship. We're going back to sponsor one of their events in September, and we've always offered, if there's recruitment fairs or when they do talks to schools and all that sort of thing about joining a fire service, we'd come along and say, look, this is how seriously this organisation, in this case Berkshire, but any one of our clients, is speaking up, and how seriously it's taking equality, diversity, inclusivity, that they've even got an independent speak up service in place, so that if anything's going wrong in the workplace and you feel isolated, you feel marginalized, you feel you can't speak up, there is a method to get that to the top of the organization, because they want to hear from you. And that is such an important message for those communities, those genders. If we're trying to recruit more females, for instance, more people from diverse communities, that's a really positive message for them to hear at the end of the day.
After the challenges of the religious sector and the film sector, we're our biggest challenge is the police services. We'd love to contribute there.
An enormous beast.
Yeah,
it's a big beast. And the NHS is even bigger, I think.
Oh yeah.
The NHS are moving forward slowly in relation to it, but it's all positive for us.
And this is one of the things that's selling point. Just think about this. Sorry to labour on about this, but
no.
If everybody in a fire service feels comfortable to speak up, then you're using inclusivity. You're including everybody.
Yeah.
And you're not just ticking a box. You're not just saying, oh, we can include everybody. Oh, aren't we good? You're actually using that tactic and that tool to make your organisation better.
You're actively avoiding an echo chamber.
Yeah, you're actively using inclusivity as a tool. You're not using it to show, oh look, we're all,
Not
yeah,
virtue
we've
signaling.
got,
Yeah.
virtue signaling. You're actually using it as a tool.
And
Fantastic.
when you go and just to sort of finish off, when you go to the safeguarding side of things, and we've had this conversation, 2 or 3 years ago, it didn't really land very well. But when you now accept that independent, impartial speak up platforms will generate more, more information around the workplace, more information to safeguard. How can you not go to it? Because how can you not implement it?
Well, they feed the development of your safeguarding policies.
Yeah, you can't safeguard if you know that by virtue of another system you'd have more information. So how can you be fully confident that you safeguarded? And this 100%. Is a conversation that didn't land very well 3 or 4 years ago.
It's the unknown unknowns in that Yahari's window, isn't it?
You don't know what you don't know. Fortunately, those conversations are a little bit better now because people are looking to implement the independent platform. So
fantastic.
But we will be looking to have a podcast ourselves.
You should
soon.
do. Yeah.
So I think you might well be one of our first guests, Pete, if that's all right.
Happy to come on, fellas. Happy to talk about it.
We can talk about
right at the end of our conversation. We both spoke about you guys you could run a podcast very easily. You have those skill sets, and you don't need some young whippersnapper like me to be blowing smoke up your ass. But I know you would absolutely smash it. It is a hell of a workload. I'll give you that. So if you're up for the challenge, go for it. But I think any company that doesn't have one in the next 15 years is missing a massive lever in their communication tool, because it's so much better than a poster or a Instagram post or LinkedIn, whatever. Paragraph. It's a very powerful tool. But I want to be very respectful of the time. People won't know we're recording this on a Saturday morning. So Paul, Shaun, thank you so much for your generosity. Thank you so much for giving time away from your families and from all your other duties. I really look forward to hopefully meeting up at some point in the future, and I really thank you for your time.
No, thank you, Peter. Been a joy. Thank you.
Nice to meet you. All the very best.
Firefighters Podcast is put together to develop, inspire, and hopefully even motivate those individuals who have chosen to serve our communities and be part of the first responder family. It's brought to you by myself, operational firefighter Pete Wakefield. If you have enjoyed today's episode and you want to see the podcast continuing, please head over to our Patreon page where you can support the ongoing efforts of the podcast. Please hit that follow, subscribe, or rate button on whatever platform you're listening to. Please support your emergency services responders, and thank you for listening.